Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out politics. So who exactly say they're going to vote for Reform UK? Well, there's been some major research carried out into it with analysis published by Hope Not Hate. It shows the 5 types of voter which are currently saying they'd vote for Reform UK. However, these voters are not at all a serious coalition. They all want not just different things, but mutually exclusive things. In other words, Farage will not be able to satisfy them all, and if they start to demand more specific promises before the election, this support will easily crumble. However, when I was discussing some other polling on tactical voting earlier this week, I said I would do a few calculations and show what the results would be. Basically, in some polling reported on in the Times about a week or so ago, various types of voters said they would vote tactically for either Labour or the Conservatives to keep Reform out, or Reform UK to keep Labour out, but a much smaller number of those. Well, using the MRP poll from YouGov from September, which is still quite recent, I calculated the impact of this if the tactical voting was in line with that polling, and I can reveal the results to you now. So 2 major polls being analysed for the price of one in this video. Don't say you don't get value around here. But anyway, shall we begin with the really messy one first? So in Monday Street, I talked about some polling which showed that Lib Dem, Green and even Conservative voters would be prepared to vote tactically for Labour in any Labour reform battlegrounds in order to keep Reform UK out of government. And there are also Labour, Lib Dem and Green voters who will vote Conservative in Tory reform battlegrounds to also prioritise keeping Reform UK out. Now, there are also voters from all of those parties who would also vote tactically for Reform UK against both Labour and the Conservatives too. So what I did was take the most recent MRP poll from YouGov, which is only from September, so quite recent, and YouGov are consistently, they've been for the last 3 general elections now, the most accurate with MRP poll, so it's as good as we can get. And I mapped this tactical voting poll onto it to see what the results would be. Now, I'd like to tell you, do you know what? Completely turned the projections upside down. It wouldn't do that based on current polling. However, it would absolutely stop Reform UK in their tracks. They would be never able to form a government. In fact, you should see the mess it makes. It makes an absolute train wreck out of Parliament. But that is still better than Reform UK government, right? Let's take a look. So if you're of a nervous disposition, make sure you're sat comfortably. Nice cup of calming tea at hand or whatever calms you down. The MRP results from September did not make for happy reading. Now, I've already explained a few times, several things contributing to these polls will not be the same in a few years' time. But never mind that now, let's not get distracted. The results were as follows. Reform UK on 311 seats. Now, not quite a majority, but it's really not very far off. They would certainly be able to form a government. I doubt the Conservatives would join them in coalition, though you couldn't rule it out. However, memories of what happened to the Lib Dems when they supported a more senior batshit crazy coalition partner, I think would probably rule it out, but you never know. And if they did join up, that would give them that strong enough majority. But they may offer a supply and confidence deal, given that the Tories will largely approve of Farage's economic plans because they're the same ones. So you would have a Reform UK government. It'd be a minority government, a little bit shaky. And if their local government performances are anything to go by, as chaotic as hell, filled with broken promises and infighting. But it would form a government. But with the tactical voting intentions highlighted in the Times last week, what would that do to the results? Well, it would transfer about 44 seats from Reform UK to Labour and 57 from Reform UK to the Tories. So yes, tactical voting would somehow work out better for the Tories than Labour, but such are the mad times we live in. Now, a few caveats really before I explain the consequences. First, that is assuming that the tactical voting intention is spread evenly. In reality, it won't be. However, what's interesting is you will probably find it's more pronounced in areas that can most benefit, because that's where you'll have the greatest focus from campaign groups, right? So if anything, the number of seats Reform lose to tactical voting could be greater. Second, just in case people don't realise I actually do know how to do maths, I am a political commentator with a mathematical background, a very rare beast. I did add on the tactical voting in favour of Reform UK as well as against, right? Third, tactical voting intentions tend to increase once the election arrives. So these figures are like several years out from the election. As we get closer to it, you would think they'll actually increase, meaning Reform UK could lose even more. Fourth, bear in mind that some seats can be very tight and other things could muck about with the tactical voting, such as, so there are some Green voters who are saying they'd vote Labour in a Reform Labour battleground. But what if they don't realise that their constituency between those two? What if on the polling, the Green Party are just a few percent behind and they think, oh, the Greens could win, I'll still vote Green. When in reality, no. So you need the voters to recognise who the contest is really between if they don't have access to reliable information. But I can only go with what I get. And fifth, there will be the scope for tactical voting that would help other parties out as well, like the SNP, Greens and Lib Dems, for example. But that wasn't covered in the polling, so I can't factor that in. So this is what it would do to results. This is a right old mess, I did tell you. Basically, nobody is forming a government like this. Reform UK would have 210 seats, more than 100 short of a majority. No chance. The Tories will be even less likely to join them under these circumstances because more than half of their MPs will have won their seats due to tactical voting, specifically to keep Reform UK out. It would be political suicide to join Reform in any capacity, right? You know, if more than half of your parliamentary party were elected by people who gave you a clear instruction, do not do anything with Reform UK, you're not going to do anything with Reform UK. But on the other side, I mean, there's no chance there either. There would be no prospect for any sort of government, realistically. There's no progressive coalition with these numbers, especially as it would have to contain, if they even attempted it, several parties with a very small number of MPs who will make outsized demands. In reality, it would end up with another general election shortly afterwards, and who knows what would happen then. But this level of tactical voting would take Reform UK from being able to form a shaky but viable minority government to no chance of getting anything done. Even where there is overlap with the Conservative policies, there wouldn't be the numbers. It would, of course, wreck the economy, but that will happen with a reformed government anyway. But does it have to even come to this? Well, the tactical voting will still be important. It always is, unfortunately, until we change our system. But there's more reason to suppose Reform UK could collapse as it gets close to the election date. Not just because Labour's achievements should start to be visible then, but because there's a fundamental impossibility in meeting the demands of Reform's coalition of voters. Basically, the only thing that unites them right now is dissatisfaction with established politics. So let's take a look. So this latest research shows 5 types of voter. The working right, the hardline Conservatives, the squeezed stewards, the contrarian youth and the reluctant reformers. And remember, these are just the Reform supporting types of voter. There are multiple other types that have been identified by pollsters as well. When I say that voting is very fragmented these days, this is why. And no direction from any party leader will change it. There are just too many different types of voter these days. Our electoral system cannot cater for them. It's broken, right? But anyway, who are these voters? Well, the biggest chunk, squeezed stewards, are those who have been made anxious about immigration, but also concerned about nature and community. Reform's general rhetoric about communities will appeal to them, but probably less so specific policies, particularly environmental ones. So they're there for the taking. The next group are the working right. These are the classic left behind voters who support strong workers' rights, but are very anti-immigration. This is the group Labour are really focusing on right now. They're a fairly big group. They can certainly win them over on workers' rights, if only they would talk about them now and then. And by now and then, I mean all the time. This group would also be dismayed to hear Farage voted against them because someone carried out some research in Clacton on that. They couldn't believe Farage voted against them, right? So if only Labour would point that out as well. But it's hard to see how Labour win them over on immigration issues. That hasn't stopped them trying, though. Interesting that they are described as an angry group, which of course means more susceptible to social media bullshit. Another problem for Labour, who are shit at the social media game. Next are the reluctant reformers, typical swing voters in that they don't want a massive jolt to the system of the sort Reform threaten. They just want competent government and some stability. They are described as backing Reform UK out of frustration, not because they're real believers. It's a kind of nothing else works, so give it a punt. Very dangerous because this is why Brexit happened, but also the group that is least likely to back Reform UK when it actually comes to it at the election, as long as Labour can demonstrate some of that stability, which they're really not doing at the moment, and competence. I would say Labour have a very good chance of winning this group over once the work taking place now becomes very visible and if they can just calm the shit down. Hardline Conservatives don't need much explanation. Small state Tories, they would find Farage's rhetoric on Thatcherite economic policies very comforting, but described as not being a fan of the populism within the movement. Still, I can see them voting Reform UK pragmatically if the Conservatives stand no chance in their constituencies. This is the group the Conservatives should be pushing to try and appeal to. The problem with the Conservatives at the moment, they're trying to appeal to the wrong group. They should be focusing on this group. Labour aren't going to win this group over, and they're not even attempting to. Finally, contrarian youth, described as financially insecure. I mean, they're the youth, so yeah. Politically volatile with a mix of cynicism and conspiracy with flashes of optimism. So sounds to me like the lads going out to the Tommy Robinson marches and thinking life will be great if only they vote for the privately educated spiv who enjoys drinking wine at £30 a glass from London's most exclusive posh boys clubs. Now, Labour do have quite a few policies aimed at investing in young people. I'm not sure this is quite the group they will appeal to. Still, it's also not a large group, and of course young people tend to vote in smaller numbers compared to their intentions. Really, if you were Labour, you'd be paying very careful attention to the squeeze stewards and reluctant reformers most of all. Labour can actually appeal to all of their needs with their policies, if they would improve their communication. The working right would also be a target, but Labour can only meet their demands for better workers' rights. I've said many times before, I think they're barking up the wrong tree on the immigration stuff. Sure, they have to talk about it a bit, but don't go on about it. You're not going to outbid Farage on immigration. But the workers' rights could be enough to hive some of them off. But the key thing is not that Labour actually have a decent chance with about 2.5 of those groups, which is consistent with other polling, I have to say. It's that they're not a harmonious group amongst one another. If Farage is forced to present specific policies at the election, he's going to lose quite a few of them. Now, he will attempt to be as ambiguous as he can in 2029 with his promises. But if pressed, he could be in trouble. And combine that with the tactical voting intentions and how the public might respond once the NHS is in much better shape, housing is looking more hopeful, the community centres are up and running, and energy prices are down and more reliable, and Nigel Farage could easily be peaking far too early. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and please subscribe to the channel for more content. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.